are you guys considering another planning commissioner, like an alternate? Like, are we working toward that at all?
I'll have to follow up with Damon. He's got a couple spots he's got to fill in different committees. So
I just am thinking about with all the stuff we have coming up, but we probably should.
he may be waiting until there's until the election.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like the Supreme Court or anything.
Yeah.
So he probably could just fill that, but he might be waiting to see who is the mayor and have them invite somebody.
Yeah.
How's it going, Dan?
I would rather have someone here. Kind of learning the ropes as soon as
Right,
possible.
there's a learning curve that goes with it.
Yeah, and so I would rather have someone here even if they're not.
Okay.
voting.
We should be ready to go.
Got to a really good place. Really knowing what the role is.
Yeah, I expect it's been
I'm good either way. This is the one I've had in their folder, so we'll just
Yeah.
we can you can update it, tweak it a little bit for planning for city council.
Maybe, because I know we have an bigger turnover and then you guys are up to it.
Yeah, there's more.
Are you done? Like, would you
Okay.
consider starting longer?
Yeah.
Stay a little bit.
It's
Just to try to check it
That's
out.
for the meeting along.
But both of you guys, that's-
yeah, it was like this
Yeah.
last night too. So
Oh,
I thought
I
you
think it
guys
just
were
is
better
our
over.
than-
Yeah.
than me.
Boy,
But
more
I think
layers
it's
in this
right.
meeting.
Is that right?
Probably so.
Because I think they started the same time.
What's that?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, we got a tie?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's much to tie. Oh.
Yeah.
I think you were.
Yeah.
Sweet. It's gonna start it up.
Okay.
Good to see you.
What's on the agenda tonight?
Oh, not much. Just rubber stamping stuff. But I wonder if this is all.
Yeah, this is.
Oh, are they?
come away from the discussion at the city office.
Do you think there's gonna be a requisition?
No worries. That's how it works.
I worry about half of them.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
It'd be interesting.
Pardon me? Yeah. Sitting in the middle of the road. Yeah.
Resident of the Planning Commission. Rezone, it's on, you know, I'm gonna try it now. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I think there's
Smiling at subdivisions. That's probably what most of that.
Marie, are we all ready to go? Okay, welcome to the October 21st, 2021 North Logan Planning Commission meeting. It appears that we are only missing Nan tonight and we'll excuse her absence. We will begin by having, let's see, Eric give the Pledge of Allegiance, after which Dwight will offer a prayer.
Stan, please repeat after me. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our beloved eternal heavenly Father, as we bow before thee this night as a planning commission and citizens of North Logan, we're grateful for the privilege and opportunity which we have to assemble together under the furlough of our American flag. We're grateful for the blessings that we do receive as citizens of this great nation. We're thankful for the opportunity which we have to live in this great part of the valley. We're thankful for the opportunity to participate in our civil duties, and we humbly pray thy spirit to be with us, to watch over, protect, and dress us with thy needs, and help us to be conscious of those who are speaking this night, that we may be kind and courteous, and that you would allow those who would wish to speak may do so in free and open manner. We pray for the blessings of thy and to be upon us as we go forth. We'll be able to make those decisions that would be best for the citizens of this great city. And we thank thee again for all of our blessings. In the name of thy beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Dwight and Eric. Okay, I would entertain a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
Motion to adopt the agenda is outlined.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and we have our October 7th, 2021 Planning Commission meetings to approve. I would entertain a motion to do that.
I would so move we approve the minutes as submitted.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Spencer, do we have any follow-up on issues from our previous meetings?
No follow-up this
Okay.
week.
Okay, then I think we can jump right into commission business, starting with a public hearing to receive public input on modifying the North Logan City Code, Title 12 land use, modifying the requirements for small multi-unit storage and large warehouse type storage as a conditional use. Spencer, would you mind giving us the background on this? I know we've discussed it before, but.
Yes, so we've had several discussion items on this, but I'll go through the basics. So right now, storage, small multi-unit storage and large warehouse storage facilities are conditional uses in several of our zones, the general commercial zone, industrial zone. But there are no specific conditions attached to those, which makes it difficult when an application comes in because there's not anything written down for an applicant to look to follow. So this kind of pins that down a little bit and adds more specific requirements so that it's very clear for an applicant when they come in. Essentially, the biggest thing that we focused on is making sure this applied only to units that are used primarily for storage that would fall under that self-storage facility. This wouldn't apply to like a flex space with some warehousing and some garages. It's facilities that are just storage and rented out commercially. So that's this first definitions. The requirements in particular are the big one is that there's a buffer from our main streets as to where those could be located. And that's 330 feet. So that way we don't have storage facilities right along our main street or along 2500 North, those two axes. And then with that, there are a couple additional requirements within the required landscape setback. All non-residential has a 20-foot landscape setback to parking, pavement, those sorts of things. This would just require a berm in that setback and a few more trees than a standard development. And require that to be irrigated and landscaped almost as a screening along with the orientation of the storage units. So it just makes it a lot more specific and clear what the requirements are when somebody comes in.
Okay, all right. If the commission has any comments, we can start there and then we'll open up the public hearing aspect of this meeting.
We're discussing first.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's open it up to the public hearing then. Just a few rules about public hearings. Before you begin, state your name for the record, speak into the microphone, limit your statements to 2 minutes. If you're speaking on behalf of others, you may ask the chairman for more time. Please phrase your opinions in the forms of statements, not questions. A public hearing is your opportunity to express your opinions to the planning commission, not a time to ask questions and expect dialogue. Address your comments to the commission, not to the public. The commission might ask questions about your comments in order for them to better understand you. If you have questions or need to discuss an issue, please meet with the planning commission members or city staff before the public hearing. And then you may provide a written statement as your input for the hearing, and you may read that or summarize it. So with that, if there's any public input on this matter. Okay, seeing none, we will close the public hearing and we will begin the discussion among the commission members.
So I had two, I guess, clarifications. One clarification, one. Oh, sorry. You good now? Okay. I can't remember what I said. Just kidding. Two things. Where did the 330 feet come from in subsection A?
Right. Yeah, so that we took a look at the buffer and what a typical business takes. So we wanted to make it so a lot of businesses fronting Main Street have more space and go back farther. We didn't want to rule out the back halves of those property. That wouldn't necessarily preclude somebody from putting, say, a commercial multi-tenant building in front and having storage in the back. So we didn't want to go farther than that 330. But that seemed to be a good average to allow for a mix of uses in several cases.
The only reason I'm asking, that just seems like a long ways to go back, but
Right.
I'm just curious where 330 came from. The next thing that I had was in subsection D. All outside storage shall be located at the rear of the property, completely screened from public view. And how do we completely screen? So I'm assuming outside storage would be RVs, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, anything that's not enclosed in a building, wouldn't necessarily need to be RVs, just for self-storage facilities. It's by a solid screen fence. So that could be a vinyl fence that's solid. It's just something that doesn't have not like a chain link that you can see through,
Okay.
not a slatted fence.
So the concern that I have with that is just the definition then of completely screened,
Okay.
meaning that becomes an awful tall fence for some. I mean,
If it's an
as we
RV.
drive around, you see some of the storage, self-storage areas, and they'll rent space for RVs and some of those outside things. And I think that'd be difficult unless that's the intent. I was just, for me, I was trying to understand what's our intent? Is our intent here to completely screen something, or is it just to provide some kind of fencing?
I can remove that word completely entirely, and the effect is the same. It just has to be a screen by a solid fence. That can only be 6 feet tall by our
Right.
ordinance anyway. So if the rest of the planning commission is on the same page, I could just remove that word.
Well, what is the minimum fence? Because what if we're saying screened and they're saying, okay, we'll do a 3-foot fence? Is that direction possible?
Potentially, it does have to get reviewed and approved by a design review, but we could make it more clear and just say screen from public view by a 6-foot solid screen.
I think that's sufficient.
Okay.
I do. I don't think the completely necessarily is crucial.
I just think that it could be an area of undefinition, or
Right.
Yeah.
could create some ambiguity,
Okay.
or a challenge to completely screen something. So yeah, that's the only two comments that I had
Okay.
in reviewing it.
All right. Anyone else? I know
Um,
we've discussed this at length, so.
Yeah. I think it's BE, the water landscaping issues there
Right here.
are required to be irrigated. With our concerns for water, et cetera, and so forth, we want to encourage other than irrigated, or
Right.
wanna keep-
The reason that's in there is you find at times there have been issues, not as much in our own city, but in other cities, and it's found in a lot of other codes, because the landscape would just be installed and then not maintained or kept alive by watering, which at that point it just dies and doesn't screen anything. So having the stipulation that it has to be maintained and have irrigation to it will ensure that it continues being a screen and fills that function. So that's the intent there.
I think generally there are restrictions on watering that are outside of that. I think it's just saying, make sure it's automated. That's my impression anyway, that there are going to be financial incentives to not water excessively, and
Right.
same with just general restrictions.
Right. And this doesn't stipulate that they have to put grass in. It can be water wise landscaping. It can be rock mulch and shrubs and trees. It doesn't have to be, or grasses or however else. It just has to be irrigated in some manner.
Mhm.
Yeah, and when you got trees, you're gonna need some sort of irrigation, so
Right.
it's covered.
Okay, thank you.
Does that satisfy you, Dwight?
Yep.
Okay, I guess we're not taking action on this tonight, we are?
We
Okay.
can, if you would
And are
like
we
to.
positively recommending?
This would be a recommendation.
Okay, then I would entertain a motion on adopting this ordinance.
Oh. Go ahead. You look like you wanted to.
No, that's all right. I'll second.
Sure? Oh, you'll
Take
second.
turns, you guys.
Rock, paper, scissors. So I will make a positive recommendation that this be recommended as stated with a couple of the clarifications
Mhm.
as noted, as written, other than those clarifications.
Okay, can I get a second?
I'll second it.
Oh,
We'll give it to Dwight. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. All right, we will move on to the second item, consideration and possible recommendation of a concept plan for the Smiling H subdivision, approximately 47 acres located at approximately 700 East, 2500 North. The proposed subdivision includes 136 lots in the R112 zone and is being proposed to be subdivided using the density determinant method. Spencer, would you give us some background on this?
Yes. So first I'll go there just to give some context. This land is off of 2500 North. It's on both the north side and the south side of that road. It includes several different parcels as listed in the agenda. It is zoned for the R112, which as stated is single family, 12,000 square foot lot minimum, and has been for quite some time. There's no rezone requested. It's just being developed in that zone and in those parameters. I'll flip over to the concept plan now so we can take a look at it. It's a little bit bigger, and with the screen size, I'll just start and go one half at a time. So the north half of the street has the alignment of 600 East that will in the future connect into in front of Ashley Court. Homes around several roads that circulate through, and a connection for potential future development at some point to the north there of the subdivision. Then to the south, you've got 600 East continuing down south, and roads that come through with the lots in between. So this is being divided using the density determinant method, which takes the total acreage, determines the number of lots, and then there's a little leeway in the lot size. So the minimum lot size using this method is 10,000 square feet. Then to counteract that, you'll have several lots that are much bigger. So it evens out to that 12,000 number. And they have met that requirement of 10,000 square feet as well. I'll flip over to the memo just to hit a couple of the highlights from our development review committee meeting. The developer has worked and come in and met with us in a pre-application meeting and gone through several of the items. As far as future reports and studies that should be required for this one, soils report, the applicant agreed to provide that. We believe that should be recommended, and just check especially to make sure there's no high water issues. It should be, all should be well here. A geology part report is tied in with that report. Grading and drainage will determine the stormwater and runoff for the site. We recommend that be approved or be completed. There's no open space or parks as part of this using the density determinant method, so that report won't need to be compiled. Water conservation plan. This subdivision does have access to secondary water. We've talked with the applicant, and they're planning to install infrastructure for secondary water for these lots and have water shares for each lot. So just a basic report showing valves and main lines for that system will be provided with the water conservation. As far as additional studies, one thing that could be considered by the Planning Commission, just due to the large number of lots in the area, would be a traffic study, looking at the intersections there. So that could be an additional study that you look at if you determine it necessary. As far as recommendations, our standard recommendations, just that the reports be completed by a development plan stage by the time it comes back. That all the design standards are used for all improvements and designs, and that it will be recorded with an engineered plat. And the applicant has expressed that they will follow all those as well in our discussions with them. So I'll go back to this concept plan now, and I can answer any questions anybody may have.
Right, so Spencer, a couple of things. As I gone through and looked at the lots and the land. I'm just trying to make sure that we're squared away in terms of the number of lots and the number of acres, as we're looking at that for density determinant. As you look on the north end, there are a few lots there that are not numbered.
Right up here at these
Correct.
7. Okay.
Yep, and so I see 6 lots there that are not numbered. And then on the southeast corner, I believe there's another, I think it's another 6.
Down here.
And so I just would like to try and get, numbers we know, okay, how many lots exactly and how much acreage
Okay.
at this point in time.
There's still a little bit of coordinating with landowners. There are several parcels that are potentially joining in or considering that option. So that's probably the reason there's a little bit of flux. Somebody from the applicant may be better able to speak to that. I don't know if anybody would like to, or if I covered it well enough. Hopefully I'm doing an okay job.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could kind of just give us that information. Okay, sounds great. And if you just step up to the podium, then we can hear you.
Statement.
Yeah.
Matthew Bishop. So these down here right now are not considered part of any non-numbered lot is not part of the subdivision today. But the city wanted to connect into this Shady
Lane is what that
Lane cul-de-sac. So we designed the subdivision to do that in the future. If one of the property owners on the northern side right there would like to come into the development, then we'll be able to complete and add those in. Same thing on the north side, if you want to go back up to the north. So those 6 lots up there on the far north, the Martins, I think they want to keep it in the family for farming, which is absolutely fine. And we just kind of adjust some of maybe that northern section to make sure our lots are kind of like pushed up into there. So we got to bring them back down to our side and just kind of adjust things slightly. But effectively, we'll end up with 128 lots as is right now that we control or own. And it's, let's see, 34.7 and I think 12 something in total would get us to that 46, 47 acres.
And you feel comfortable that like that lot 30 has a significant portion in the Martin's land that you'd be able to modify that?
Probably end up, so those straight up and we could drop that down or take this over and then our engineers here, he'll
Okay.
do it. But yeah, we'd be able to basically keep the same number of lots and get them into our property.
Do you have a sense of when those things will be sorted out, when you'll know whether they're going to be participating?
I think on the north side, I'm highly confident that they're not going to be sorted out so that we can start doing that right now. We've been in discussions with the southern McGinnis. And so he's making up his mind, which is, again, we're not pressuring anybody. It's, if you want to be a part of it, we're happy to have you join in. I think what Spencer has said, if they're part of it, they get a higher density, better use, maximizing the property. If they're not, and they're coming in later and trying to do it, because I think if you look, you can see this dotted line, that's the property line.
Mhm.
So really, they'd be able to fit 2 lots in there, but by being part of it, they'd be able to fit 2.5.
Okay.
So it helps with the density on their property, but again, it's
But
not something that
that's-
we're forcing. at
And
all.
that southern part doesn't really impact, you wouldn't have to redesign any lots based on that?
No,
Okay.
not on the southern.
Okay. And then so the acreage we're seeing here, the 47.68, I think is what it says.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate to what we
To
control.
what you have now with the numbered lots.
Yes, for
Okay.
the 128. It's 128, I believe.
Okay. And then just to confirm it, and it's been something that we have, we've paid closer attention through given this past summer. Spencer's indicated secondary water is there. Confirming we've got adequate shares to cover all of the irrigation, the outside irrigation.
Absolutely.
And the zoning on those that you don't control, is that it's all zoned R112?
It is.
Okay.
The whole area. And I think if you look at it, we're actually at we and the code could be up to 3.08
Yeah.
lots an acre, and I think we're at 2.68. So we're
Right.
actually under density to be able to fit the roads and apply with what the city has asked us to do. So we've actually kind of taken a haircut from a developer standpoint, which is something I battle out with Spencer every time we meet, but he's a good guy, so I don't hit him too hard.
What's your average lot size? Do you know offhand?
But
Without
it's
me
gotta
doing the
meet that
math.
12,000.
Yeah, I know. I'm just curious what it
Yeah.
It's
came out to be.
probably around 11, I would say.
Okay.
If we looked at kind of a median, 11,000.
All right, any other questions?
Oh, that was a similar question I was going to ask Spencer, and that's the number of lots that are less than the 12,000 versus the number that are over 12,000. To get that balance, we have any idea what the number is
Yeah,
to
so
impact the openness, the density there?
I'm not sure what the total number below and above is. They did do some takeaways on here, and I'll zoom in so you can see it. So of that, and it sounds like that 47.6 is the number. There's 2.68 lots, and I'm guessing that's per acre instead of area there, total, and that's taking into account the roads as well. So the road area is counted. So
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily tell us how many are at 10,000 square feet, but and we could look into that. As you can see, just as you're looking through it, a lot of times when the roads are straight and things are squared up, they get down to about that 10,000 square foot. You can see on this upper road here, when you have straight roads and everything's efficient and clean, when you get to these corners, this one's a 20,000 square foot, that's a half acre. You get to some of these other spaces and they're 15, 13. So there's a pretty good mix in here of different lot sizes. On the straightaways is where you find most of the closer to 10,000 square foot lots.
Do we have any that are under 10,000 square feet?
No, there are some that are right on 10,000, but they did a good job of making sure they hit that number. And the other limiting factor that made it so you couldn't quite get to the max was the 10,000 and then the 80 feet of frontage. And so they used both of those to get to the number.
Okay. I assume the reason we're popular tonight is that we have people here to speak on this. So I think we can do something with the 2-minute time limit if you want to come up and speak to this issue. Just again, state your name. All the same rules apply.
Hi, my name is Carrie Olson, and we're the last piece on the south. We haven't had discussions with the developer yet, but we're anxious to cooperate and see what we can do. I just wanted to quickly say 69% of the lots are under 12,000. And 60% are in the 10,000 range. So the majority of them are in that 10,000 to 11,000 range.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to speak?
We'll scroll down.
Yes.
John Brewer.
Are you looking above 25?
Yeah, go up north.
Okay, right about here.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I live right here. So of course, my wife and I, April, are really concerned about this and the environmental impact of putting in all these houses. And the valley just keeps heating up because of all the asphalt. And we're going to be watching really carefully as this goes in, as far as all the codes, all the development codes. We're really going to be paying really close attention to all of this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brewer. Anyone else? Okay, Spencer, how long has this been zoned that R112?
I am not, it's been that way ever since I started here. I've been working here for 2.5 years. I know it's been that way for a lot longer than that.
Okay,
We haven't changed our zoning in quite some time. I would have to look back through records to see if I know that. Jay, do you know, Alan?
My best guess is most of the zoning took place in the late 60s, early 70s.
okay,
This hasn't changed since then, to my recollection.
Okay.
However, a lot of the zoning that went through, they retroactively just zoned it to a zone somewhat distant area. But Most of the zoning that's R112 and R110 throughout the city have not changed since about 1967.
Okay. Okay, any other questions from the commission? My understanding is that they are fully compliant with the zoning requirements. And therefore, there's not a discretionary element to this in terms of approving it at this stage. I do think it's important that we do have that traffic study. I think
agree.
that's a really significant
Yep.
portion of the city.
Yep.
So that would be a condition on our positive recommendation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. Any other comments before we move on this? Okay. Oh, yeah, sure.
So you're in a good spot. So this property actually comes out here. And so we originally had a road to come out on 800. But as you can see, there's the
A
offset.
jag, yeah.
Yeah.
So when we go ahead and do this study, I'd like to be able to access that and see have the study also look at what the impact would have there, because if we could open this up, I think it ultimately creates better flow for the city. There might be some traffic issues with the left-hand turns. So Alan and Spencer, and we've discussed this ad nauseum at the Tuesday morning meetings. And you know, I understand it completely, but since you're asking for a traffic study, I'd like to open it up to include that as part of the study.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Is there any hesitation with that?
No.
Okay,
And just to finalize there, because right now it shows a cul-de-sac.
Yes,
And-
sir.
And is that how it will, for this development, that's how it would end, as a cul-de-sac for now?
Today,
Today.
yes, if the study says something and you would agree to allow us to have the access there, Spencer, if you could go south,
Yes.
just right there you go. We created an access to have an ingress egress.
Mhm.
25 would like to close that off. And
Oh.
then have it coming off of 600, not react.
Oh.
Go
Oh.
back out on 800 up
800.
north.
Yeah.
okay,
Where that cul-de-sac is. That's how it was originally drawn. But due to city requirements and requests, we modified the plan.
okay. Yeah, let's look into
Makes
it.
sense.
And you own that
That strip.
strip?
Yes.
Okay,
So basically, we would have that as open space, a trail, maybe a community planning, you know, farm or not farm, but garden.
garden, yes, okay, okay.
And one more question, and have you been in discussion with the brewers, for example, and the other potential individuals
Which
who
I
might
don't know
be a
the
part of
Brewers
the
are up
long
in
range
that-
plan?
North,
The brewers were
West
across the canal.
They're in the other subdivision.
I have not, no, we've gone, the strategy was that the people literally adjacent to us, because if I can't get the adjacent parcel, then why talk to the person? So we talked to the Martins. We've, if you. Thank you, so, yeah. So there's gonna be some lot line adjustments to the Anderson. They've agreed to give up the northern side to take some of the property here. So we're doing this kind of readjustment on the Andersons. The Magnum do not want to participate, so that's absolutely fine. And Mr. McGinnis is here, and if he decides to join in, then we would work with both the Olsons and the, but that's why for you, we haven't really approached you, because we can't get there.
okay,
I guess one last just comment that as I see it, one thing I do appreciate is at least where you've got bigger lots surrounding it. I appreciate that there are bigger lots that tend to match, that it phases a little bit and it doesn't go straight from large to small.
I can't take credit for that. I have to, you should point to our engineer on that, to Ben, so.
Very good.
okay. All right, then I would entertain a motion on this.
And right now, we're just talking concept,
Yes,
This
so
is-
we're determining what sort of recommendation to make to city council on the concept plan.
I would move we approve the concept plan for the Smiling H subdivision.
Positive recommendation.
Positive recommendation,
And with the addition of the traffic study.
correct, with the addition of the traffic study.
Okay, and a second,
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion, that was Jeff.
Sorry, I'll speak up.
I'll state that for the record. Okay, that motion passes. Okay, we will move on to the third item, consideration and possible recommendation on a proposal to rezone partial 18-006-004, approximately 28.6 acres at approximately 2350 east, 2700 north from residential or RE5 to RE1. Spencer, can you just get us back up to speed on this? I know
Yes.
we've talked about this a lot too. And gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind taking the discussions outside the council room, that would be helpful to us. Immediately.
Use your gavel.
Where's your gavel? Yeah.
If you guys would just take it into the hall, that would help us be able to continue with commission business. Thank you. Okay, Spencer, if you would.
Yes. So the parcel in question, and again, we've talked and looked at this several times in the past. 28.6 acres, currently zoned residential estate, 5 acre RE5. The proposal is to rezone that to 1 acre. With that proposal, several different items were brought as items of concern. And the applicant, Nick Porter, has gone through the different items back and forth. Several of the items have been cleared up and put into a development agreement. That's the primary new thing that has been put into place, that the applicant is expressed they'd be willing to sign prior to any rezone, which would essentially make the rezone conditional on that development agreement being followed. And I'll pull up that development agreement here. So it has several different items in here. One of them is the street improvements. In this development agreement, it lists 8%. Our code, we've discussed, our design standards state that 8 to 10% needs special approval from the city council, 8% does not. In talking with the applicant and our engineer, the road grade could get down to 8%. And I'll show those profiles here, that it gets down to 8%. However, it's going to make the lots on the east side just more steep, their driveways to get up to their house. You can see that in several lots in Wildercrest. The engineering staff, Lance and other staff, would actually probably recommend that be raised to 10%. That's still a manageable grade, still within the bounds of our code, but would help out on those east side lots if approved.
Spencer, just for a minute, could you give us an idea of what road in our city is at that 10%?
Ellen, I don't know if you have any examples.
I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just curious. What's so
3100 north coming from 16 east up to 18 east.
okay.
This one.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
I'm really guesstimating, but I know the road to south that are a little bit steeper from 13.
Okay. Okay, sorry, continue,
No worries.
Spencer.
Yes. And I will go
Well,
back
actually,
into
while
that.
we're there, what would that require in terms of if we were to make that exception? Is that part of, like, would that be a condition on a positive recommendation, or how would we implement that?
Yes, we could make a condition and state, because the development agreement as written states 8%. We could just state that the planning commission recommends that go up to 10. It's city council. Our code is listed as city council that would ultimately make that decision, but we could recommend that if desired.
Okay.
The other issue that was brought up is water, and there's 2 different fronts on that. One is distribution. As is with no improvements, there is no water pressure to get up to any of these lots. So the applicant has agreed to install a line to get to the north Beef Hollow tank, which would allow for water pressure in the area. And there's a way, kind of a pioneering agreement. A large section of that pipe would be outside of the bounds of the property. So they've outlined how that section would be funded through pioneering agreement and through participation from the city. As far as the supply is the other issue, and this is something we ran into and we have run into just this past year especially. Just because the distribution is there doesn't mean there's enough water there. And that was covered in a few different ways. So one is turf and lawn restrictions down to 4,500 square feet. And then that would require a landscape plan to be submitted with building permit, which is not required in any but our city center zones now. And the applicant has agreed to that. And then a limit in amount of water per month that could be used until our future tanks are installed, which we're actively seeking to install right now to improve our water situation. That amount would be limited to basically interior use, 6,500 gallons. We are hoping to get those installed in the next 1 to 2 years. Alan can correct me if I'm wrong on that. At which point the usage could go up to a higher number. 45,000 gallons is a fairly low number for a lot that includes exterior water. And to enforce that, we've talked with the applicant on having a different set of tiered rates. We have tiers in our rate system. And this is something we could potentially look to apply as part of our water conservation plan. Any new development that doesn't have secondary irrigation has tiered rates that go up significantly after you reach that 45,000 gallons. It is still a bit tricky to enforce because if somebody has the funds to do so, they could potentially add more grass after their initial landscape is installed and use more water and just pay the bill. But it does help in enforcement. It's not a perfect solution, but those are things the applicant agreed to. The other big sticking point was the Bonneville Shoreline Trail.
Spencer, can I just interrupt you
go
there
ahead.
on water, if you don't mind?
Go ahead.
So I assume this all goes through and, there's that limitation on water usage. How would city employees down the road, 20 years down the road, know that restriction's in place? Like what indicator is there with
Right.
this subdivision? Would it be just word of mouth or how does that work?
We would have to set up a special tiered rates for that specific area. So it would be in our utility billing at that point. That is a good question. And especially if we adapted it and added it to our water conservation plan. And then there are several developments above the canal that follow this same standard, which is how we would probably want to operate. So we're not giving different standards to different development. That would be something we would logistically need to figure out and have a system for.
Okay. And at what point would that even begin? Because I'm assuming you're saying we're going to set up a tiered rate for developments that don't have access to secondary water. And we'd be setting up an entirely different system.
Right.
Applicable from now until, indefinitely, or?
Right.
I mean,
all new subdivisions. And that's something we could potentially scale back if water supply, if we have our water system becomes more equipped to handle homes that don't have secondary. I will need to work with Jordan, the Public Works Director, and with Alan to get that rolling.
okay. And Alan, did I cut you off? Did you have something to add?
I was just gonna say that it's a very good question on enforcement. That's been the biggest question from the beginning. And making it fair to both the individuals buying a lot, moving the city and to the city so we can actually provide water. And I think what we are looking at is very hard to enforce the square footage of landscaping, although we would want that in there to encourage that. But the tiered rate, we looked at maybe just doing 3 tiers, and the lower tiers would be very fair, similar to our other tiers. But then as soon as you hit the 30 or 40,000, they're very aggressive.
Okay.
Being there, we're looking at our upper tiers right now, 4, 5, and 6, we're looking like $10 to $20 per 1,000 gallons.
Okay.
So actually we've done some things as extreme as that. But then, like Spencer said, as our supply increases and as we do things, we can scale that back. But I would still recommend just looking at maybe specific tiers.
Yeah.
Areas without saying very far.
Yeah, and it's important to me as well to be consistent in how we do that we're not giving Mr. Porter a parameter that then changes for the next person that comes in. So, okay. So sorry, we're just
Oh.
gonna interrupt as we think of things.
No,
Anyone
yeah,
else can too.
that's great. The last two items in here, parks and trails. So the Bonneville Shoreline Trail initially was an issue. The applicant has expressed that they're willing to install that and dedicate it. So willing to put that in according to our Trails Master Plan. And then along with that, the lot count. So there was some concern going from RE5 to RE1 that say this development in particular that has 7 lots doesn't go through, and another developer comes in, purchases the subdivision, then puts more lots on there, 14 lots. This would, in the development agreement, require that the maximum is 7, and that the agreement, and we'll have to state in there that the rezone will revert back to the RE5 if this development agreement isn't followed. So if the development is sold, they want to change the agreement, change the plan, we'll go back to the RE5 zoning in this. And the applicant has expressed that they're willing to do that. We could even deed restrict that as well, which the applicant again has expressed they're willing to do. So those were the items that we worked through on this development agreement.
Okay. Commission, do you have questions for
Yep.
Spencer that you've thoughtfully waited till the end to raise?
Spencer, how does that work with, on the shoreline issue there with, okay, so we've got a development plan, but then how do those shoreline restrictions or easements, how does that transfer to the person who actually buys the lot that the shoreline transgresses through?
Right. So on the lot, it would show up as an easement on the plat. So when that lot was purchased, that easement would be shown on the plat and essentially would go through their property, but would need to be maintained as a trail and could not be removed or blocked or modified and have to remain in place. So it would just be an easement.
Yeah. And legally, the person could not prevent people from walking on that trail,
Correct. It would be a
Legally.
public easement.
but they could harass and make it difficult for people who were walking through.
No, we would need to enforce that and make sure our public easement is kept. That would be something we would have to deal with as a city if that became the case. We have a similar situation in the Wildercrest subdivision, just to the south of this, where there is an easement on the plat. There are concerns that come with that, but where it goes in before the homes are built, and anybody buying a lot knows it's in place and knows it's there, that does help typically people understand that it was there first. But there will be conflicts that we'll have to deal with. But it will be public use and they don't have a right to harass people that use it.
Some questions back to the water. You referenced a couple times to participation from the city. So what does that mean?
Yes, so this line that would go, as soon as it goes past this parcel 004, there are a couple different entities that would benefit from that line, and it would connect just below our tank here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but one of those is Utco. They're a landowner there. So there would be participation from Utco, and then it also does benefit the city in that it connects into existing lines in Wildercrest. We do have issues with some of the homes along there. So the exact proportions of that, I would recommend those are fleshed out. Definitely by the time it's signed and approved by the city council. We just need to sit down and hash out the exact numbers and percentages of that participation and who covers what section is covered by this development, by Utco, by us, and how that's reimbursed.
So pardon my ignorance. Why is the city going to participate in the cost of that? cities don't develop. Developers develop.
If you tie in our water lines that are on our capital improvement plan, we schedule a public distribution throughout the city. So if you look at that, if you zoom in again, Spencer, those properties and then follow it. So the developer, charge the pipeline throughout the entire development. From the beginning, sorry,
Down
the
here.
south end of the top of their development. And then the other developer is partially responsible as well.
Mhm.
Right there.
But this also helps in some way, in some fashion, with our distribution throughout the city. And so there is a benefit citywide to us to do this, and that's a very good question, but that's the only way we participate in the water. We don't participate otherwise.
And so how is something, and I know this is city council territory, but I'm going to ask, how does something like that, how is that funded?
Through impact fees. It would be an impact fee, we wouldn't use any other fees to it. Impact fees are all related to growth.
Yeah.
All right. Nick, do you want to speak to this? I know that you had emailed me with some information.
Nick Porter. Is it helpful to go through some of the history on this property and why it ended up with the zone it is?
I think briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. So back in 2006, three landowners, Jim Maloof, Bruce Nelson, and Alan Steed, joined forces. They created Bonneville Trail Estates subdivision that went through Planning Commission. It went through City Council. It was approved. And Spencer, if you go a little further to the north, part of that subdivision was installed, and that's Meadowlark Lane as we see it today. This section here. Alan Steed did that section. Bruce Nelson owns this section. Jim Maloof owns this section. Jim and Bruce, this was about 2008. They had a $500,000 sky bridge planned to go over this ravine. They were looking at that and a downturned economy, and they decided to push pause on that. The subdivision expired, meaning they would have to come back in and redo it. And, you know, life moved on. One of the conditions, though, to put that subdivision in, Bonneville Trail Estates, was the city required them to put in a new water tank. And so those three spent $250,000 on Beef Hollow #2. Now the city contributed quite a bit more than that, and they upsized the tank beyond Bonneville Trail Estates. And also Jim Maloof was proposing Canyon Ridge Phase 3 at that same time. So he had a disproportionate amount of that 250,000. This is Canyon Ridge Phase 3. So that's how that tank exists, and that's how Bonneville Trails exists. Now, a few years ago, the city, along with Jim and Bruce, got together. They said, hey, we don't like this density. There's too many homes here. This bridge is too expensive. We think it's a disservice to those in North Logan to put that many homes on the bench. So they had it zoned. At that time, it was R1. And they, meaning Jim and Bruce, zoned it to an R5. Now, one of the things that wasn't on anybody's radar is, go back to 2008, North Logan City changed their code. They amended it, and they took out the ability to count greater than 30% slopes towards your density count. Now, none of that was really brought up during this discussion. Otherwise, Jim and Bruce would not have rezoned their property, because they effectively completely devalue it by doing that.
And but that's only in the density determinant, right? Like if you're using the density determinant method, is that true?
No, it actually
Is it both?
impacts, there's three methods, and it impacts two of the methods. And the third method is just your straight line, like your R5, you have to have a 5-acre lot.
Mhm.
So it impacted two of the three methods. Alan Steed left his property zoned R1. So today you find this portion here R1, this R5, and this R5. As we submitted this, that's when we uncovered this 30%, and others, staff members realized that at that point. It's like, oh, okay, this is kind of a gotcha. So that's why we're coming back in. We're saying, hey, we want to stick with the spirit of R5. We have 35 acres here. That's 7 lots. So we're meeting R5 in spirit, but if you look at the technicalities of the code now, that 30% restricts you from doing that.
Okay,
Hence the rezone.
questions for Nick? Okay, thank you. Anyway, further discussion. I guess one thing I'll say is I appreciate, Nick, that you've really come to the table on these issues. There are some issues that still remain that it's not in your hands, but it makes me really nervous that I understand the intent. I think the history is really helpful to understand how we got to where we are. But it gives me some heartburn in terms of the water. That makes me a little bit nervous that we're trying to enforce that much down the road, and we just don't have a mechanism in place for that. The water is my biggest sticking point. So,
As I guess just in comment and discussion, and Nick and I talked a little bit, and again, I appreciate what you've done. I think you've gone to a lot of work. I certainly see that. My concerns, I go back to overall the risk to the city. The higher up on the hill we go, the more of a risk I see. Water is a concern to me when I think of snow removal, and I know we look at slopes. We've got others that are steeper, and other people did what they did in their time. For me, I'm not comfortable going there, and in my mind, we have the discretion to rezone or not. And in my mind, the cons outweigh the pros.
Dwight, Jeff, do you guys want to?
Yeah, I think I like the spirit of what I'm reading here.
Yeah.
I'm really troubled by the enforcement of it. Because those things are extremely difficult to control and enforce. The water is a huge concern. And so I'm kind of sitting on that same water concern that you shared, Lindsay. Kind of my thoughts right this minute.
Right, Dwight?
If we're currently having issues with water pressure in Wildercrest now, and the continued expansion of homes in the area is not going to help that. And maybe you can review with me again so I can understand a little better how additional capacity and what have you will help address the overall water plan and certainly the water pressure for current
Yeah, there's two different issues there. The water pressure is pretty clearly going to help primarily one, maybe two residents. So right now we have a water line. If you see on this road here, I'll have to do it on the big screen, this 2350 East, how it goes in dead ends. We have a water line that goes in dead ends. Right at the end here, our good friends, the Newells, end up with the very end of the water line. And that pressure is very inconsistent, is a very kind way to say that. It's not at all great water pressure. If the line connected up, that would mean the pressure is coming from the tank, which is much higher on the hill. We would actually need a pressure reducing valve as part of the subdivision before it reached these homes, because there's enough fall. So the pressure issue would be resolved. The supply issue is a different matter, and that's what's been raised by several commissioners.
And maybe you could, in detail, I know there's talk of the wells and everything else. I mean, what's in the works right now, and what's hopes and dreams?
I'll have Alan probably take that. You may have to go to the mic for Marie's sake.
State your name.
And your address.
Keep it brief.
City worker.
2 minutes.
Anonymous. No, Alan Luce. Going through this process, we can't go into the specific details of where these are located, but in the area, we'll just put it that way. Most of our sources for waters are at Green Canyon, sources for water at Green Canyon. We're looking at doing an additional well and 2 reservoirs that are each 2.5 million gallons. To put that in perspective, right now we have 3 million gallons total within the city of storage. So we would add 2.5 million gallon tanks in that area. Then the boosters that are associated with that to boost it all the way across the bench. And then that additional well over the source at that point. Right now in the process, we're obviously looking into every option possible. We applied for 2 sources of ARPA funding and we'll apply for another USDA loan all at the same time. And then whichever one comes through, that's the one we'll go with.
But is there funding and work in place?
The funding is being applied for right now. It can be allocated.
It's okay, but it's we don't have it.
We don't have it.
Okay.
And the earliest it would be allocated is a week or 2 from now. And if not at that time, it would go into the legislative session, because then at that point, it's the appropriations committee and they have to decide how to use that funding.
What do you put our odds at in that 2-week time frame?
Because this has never been done before, meaning this is most of the funding comes through on an annual basis. We know what it is. We know the pool. We know the process. This is just a big chunk of money, and they're literally changing the rules probably every other week on how you apply for this. Regardless of what method it goes through, what we're seeing is North Logan is in very good standing to receive funding. How much and when, we just don't know. We qualify, we hit about every single level where 1, we have a limited supply. That's the first category. But 2, do we have all the engineering and land and everything else in place? And we check about all those boxes. And so that's why we're in a good sitting or standing to receive those funds. But again, I wish I could tell you with more higher probability odds or what our odds of getting this funding are. But I do know that we are in good standing. We could receive some as early as 2 weeks. If not, then a larger amount will be allocated or appropriated in the beginning of the legislative session in January. And so then we'd have a better understanding. And at the same time, right now, we're applying for USDA funding. It's a lengthy process, but it's starting right now, and it would just go a couple months right now to see where we are approved at that point. Obviously, that would be a grant/loan. These other ones would be a pure grant. And so we can get the grants, obviously, that's much better. But if we can get a loan at 1.5% or something along those lines for 40 years is what the USDA grants and loans are, it would be fantastic.
So say we get a grant
Mhm.
next week, and whatever your plans are, that affects this area. We'd have an increase in volume of water up here.
It's an increase in storage, right?
We'd start with the well and then we'd do the 2 storage tanks right after it.
Okay.
The well is the first step.
The first step, because it's the easier step
Okay.
at that point. We have the location, we know exactly where it needs to go. We've done the geology study. And then the other 2 tanks, we have the location for them, and we would just have to start working on that. Those take an astronomical amount of concrete.
Sure.
It's taken us 3 months to get our pickleball courts in.
Noticed.
with
Do
concrete.
not divert concrete from the pickleball courts.
But you see just how the supply and
Oh,
demand right now
Yeah.
to get things done. But we would start ASAP on those projects. We have them already good to go. We just have to pull the trigger at that point.
Okay.
And Alan, your 1 well would supply those 2 storage tanks?
They'd all supply. It's a dynamic, just.
Okay, so
Everything's
you go-
connected in,
Okay.
but the well would for surely provide that supply or bolster our supply at that point significantly. Our last well we drilled provides 3,000 gallons per minute, and we would hope for the same out of this next well. To put in perspective, the well up on the bench provides about 30 gallons to 40 gallons per minute. It would be a high producer.
So, and if I'm understanding this correctly, then without this funding, we don't increase our volume of water.
Mhm.
And to do this, then we have these enforcement measures that are in the agreement.
Correct. We would get and the enforcement measures are designed to scale back once we have a higher
Sure, yeah,
supply and
yeah.
storage. But for sure, we would get one of those 3. the USDA, we would be able to qualify.
It's just a
We just
range
have to pay
between
for it.
bond, like it's a loan
Yes.
rather than a grant.
Correct.
So, and that's kind of our last option.
Yep.
But we will be bonding for it against the water fees, I'm assuming, in worst
Yeah.
case scenario.
Our water fees and our impact fees,
Okay.
we would pay for it internally. It wouldn't increase any fees or anything else.
Okay, are we ready to let Alan leave the hot seat? Dwight, did you have something?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, are we ready to make a motion on this?
I need to, maybe it's, everything else has gone by the wayside because we're dealing with all the issues relevant to this, but if I understood Nick correctly, there's going to be 7 lots. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Regardless of whether it's RE5 or RE1.
If it remains RE5, I think we can put 1, maybe 2 lots on here. It would have to be rezoned to RE1, and then you're right. It would max out at 7 lots.
Okay, yeah.
And I will add on the water, so restricting 4,500 square feet of turf. Right now I'm renting in North Logan and I'm on a 1/4 acre and I have 5,500 square feet of grass. The 100+ lot subdivision that just got approved will have larger amounts of turf potentially on most of those than what we're restricting this to. And you're right, we will resolve the water pressure issue by running our line. The one thing we're running up against is this tank is there not enough water in there for the additional 7 homes? Is that a good way to say this, or?
Part of that infrastructure that Ellen mentioned too would be a redundant line going up to that tank, which would connect it into the system and be able to provide water up there a little bit more readily.
So I want to make it clear, the water issue is, I mean, the 100 lots seem to just go through really quick because they have secondary water, but their indoor usage is the exact same as our indoor usage. At least that's my understanding. And when I look at the chart of how the water fees are calculated, everybody's indoor fee is the exact same. It's the outdoor fee that is different, and that's based on lot size. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so a few things with that. You're right. Where it's just indoor usage, the number is extremely low. So it would be the same amount or similar. These homes might be a little bit bigger than those ones, but it'll be a very similar amount for before these tanks get installed and you're restricted to just interior. You'll be the same. A couple different things come into play. One, eventually landscape will come online. So that 4,500 gallons is just shy of 10 times what those homes will use year round, no matter what, because they have secondary. So for every 10 homes, that's one home there. So you'd be about equivalent of 70 of those homes.
Even at the 4,500 square feet.
Yeah, at the 45, about around there. The other thing that comes into play, we will boost up to that other tank, but the distribution still isn't quite as good as down in that area of the city. So we have many different wells. We have a well down at Jack's that can reach that point. It's downhill from a lot of storage and a lot of different wells. They will need to still look at the water model to make sure that they're going to be able to get enough water to there. But the location being down, a lot easier to get to with the water, does make a distribution difference. If everything was flat and it was just as easy to get all the water to one place as the other, that would be one thing, but it is harder to get to these lots. So that helps kind of clarify that just a little bit, hopefully.
Just one thought I had while I was sitting down there. If water is a huge concern here, we could make this contingent upon those tanks coming in.
Yeah,
That seems like it would solve a lot of the concerns that are being bounced around.
yeah, that was a
Thanks.
question I was going to ask, is that can we prove this contingent upon city funding, receiving funding to drill the well and to
Add the capacity.
and add the capacity of 5 million gallons of water storage.
So instead of the tier, so I'll go back quickly to this. Instead of the tier where you have 6,500 gallons per home until those tanks go in, it would just be the homes are not allowed to be constructed. It's not allowed to be developed until the tanks go in. That would definitely be something we'd need to get the sign off from Nick on, but we could potentially write that in. And just to clarify, we're not approving it here tonight. We're just recommending it. So we could add that to our recommendation. I believe that's definitely something that we'd want to make sure the applicant is on board with, because that could potentially be a large impact if we have to go to that third option of funding and it takes longer on the bond end to get those in. We wouldn't want to do that without the sign off
Right.
there.
Okay.
I mean, as I think through, folks, and again, one person's opinion here, but as I look at this, it feels to me again like the risks to the city. It's like, okay, how many ways can I bend over backwards to make this fit? And I think sometimes it just doesn't make sense to do. And in my opinion, that's where we are. You know, you can try to make the water work. The steeper you get, the more risk I think you have to the city if things go wrong. You have homeowners that say, oh, why on earth did you approve me to build up in a spot like this that was not safe? You try and remove snow up in those high areas. I think that's a concern. I think we're hitting that edge, and that's why we're having discussions like this. And again, in the end, I just don't think that that is in the best interest of the city.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. How's the commission feeling about, are we ready to make a motion on this?
Just point of clarification, the slope is, has been, well, we're approving a 10%.
You can. So that is up to you. That's what staff would recommend, but you need to include that. Right now, the development agreement says 8. Staff, if it is given a positive recommendation to move forward, we would actually recommend that goes up to 10. That'll just be translated to the east side lots. That's the road grade is the 10.
Okay, the way that I see it is that if it kind of, we maybe need to feel out whether we're leaning more towards a negative recommendation or a positive recommendation, and then from there with those stipulations. So can we maybe do a tester motion and see where the commission is on this? And Eric, if you'd like to do that.
I can. I'm
Or
trying to figure
Jeff.
out what this recommendation looks like, because I'm on the negative side and I'm not sure where everybody else is landing on this. Okay, I would make then a negative recommendation in terms of this consideration to rezone the parcels that have been listed as agenda item 4.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so that motion passes with a negative recommendation to city council. Again, Nick, if I could just express that we appreciate the hoops that you've jumped through. I think ultimately it came down, like Eric, to it feels like we're forcing this. And I think ultimately we're charged with acting in the best interest of the city. And it just is causing me too much heartburn in, several areas. But I do want to acknowledge that you have done everything you can. So, okay, then we'll move on to item number 4. Discussion about a potential modification of North Logan City Code to add an ordinance for post-division approval of improper subdivisions.
Okay, so I'll give the background on this. We have talked through this in a meeting or two prior. So just to give the overview, essentially, there are lots in the city that were subdivided without going through our subdivision process. We do have a process in our code that's been in place since the 1970s. However, there is an ability to go to the county and to create a parcel of land from a larger parcel, a parent parcel, whether that's for tax purposes or there are many different reasons. When you get years down the line with those parcels, those they didn't go through the subdivision process, didn't dedicate roads, didn't construct those improvements as part of that, didn't put in utilities, things like that. 3-4 owners down the road, 20, 30 years down the road, potentially, somebody wants to build a home there. And they come into the city to find out that they would need to do a subdivision of the entire parent parcel, which may be in a number of different pieces with a number of different owners, some of which may or may not be on board. This ordinance essentially creates a path for this, and it's termed as an innocent owner, to take their lot and improve that lot and dedicate the roadway just in front of their lotway, as long as it meets all the standards, and have a path forward to make that parcel a legitimate lot, even without having to get every other piece of that parent parcel on board. So it's a bit of a technical issue, but it essentially just would help in some certain specific circumstances in that case. So the things we've changed since we came back, we wanted to make a little more, have a little more to the qualifications of an innocent owner. There was a concern of basically the code before said if the person didn't divide the lot themselves, they're an innocent owner. We added in that they cannot be remuneratively or familially related to the party that created that improper lot, or related in any way. So that would mean that you can't have one developer have a handshake agreement with another developer, divide it improperly, have another developer come in and have a lower standard. In addition to that, there's a number of years to own the property. One alternative to that would be a number of years from the date that the property was divided, in which case that number could be much higher. Then it would be more 10 or 15. That could be something we look to change. In addition to that, before it was listed in the code in a lot of words that the standards at the time of the improper split subdivision, essentially, without going through the process, those would be the standards that would be used to legitimize the lot. That's been removed and replaced with just the current standards of the day. And that's for a couple of reasons. In some cases, these were done 40, 50 years ago. We don't have copies of the current code. We don't know what the current standards are. We need to get them up to speed with today's standards. And then another paragraph in there just to avoid concerns on the city end, that the improper lots and parent lots have to conform to the zoning. So for an example, you couldn't have a lot that doesn't have any frontage on any road get legitimized because they don't meet our zoning code as far as frontage width along a public street. Likewise, you couldn't have a lot that was split off. Say you're in a 1 acre zone, you had a 1.5 acre lot that then the parent lot was split off as a 1/2 acre. A new lot was created as an acre and somebody wants to legitimize that acre. Because the parent lot doesn't meet the code, it's not large enough for the code. That would not be we don't want to have a way for people to get more density, basically through a back door. So there are a lot of different ways that we want to make sure we plug up any loopholes for this, at the same time as providing a process for future development in difficult circumstances, essentially, if that makes sense. So that's a rough overview of what we've had. And I took this and had a long phone call with the attorney on some of this language. I've expressed that I would like him, just due to the weight of this, as far as potential for loopholes of an impact, this has very high as compared to some of the other codes we've written. I would like him to go through kind of word by word and with a fine tooth comb and change the language, any of the language and wording that needs to, so it's airtight. So he is working on that. I'm also going to sit down with the engineer again on Tuesday and give it a fresh look. I have scheduled a public hearing for 2 weeks from now. So this is just a discussion item here. If we determine we'd like to go forward with that, we can do that. If we decide we're not quite there, by the time we get to the public hearing, we can always push that off to another meeting. So.
What? Oh, go ahead.
Please.
I was just curious, how many lots does this apply to? And will we be continually having improper lots that keep happening? Or are we just trying to clean up ones that have already happened?
It's a little less prevalent today. And this kind of depends a little on how our code is written. The way it's written now and the way I initially wrote it was that an owner has to have owned it for more than 3 years. That would set it up for continually having improper lots. Now thinking about it, it'd probably be more prudent to go to, it has to have passed at least 10 years from the time the lot was split. That said, it's a little bit less frequent to have things parceled off, but it still happens. Again, there's a number of reasons for something to be parceled off without being subdivided and made into a developable lot. So we could potentially still have these pop up, but the majority will likely have been done 50, 40 years ago and are now kind of being brought to light. That's the majority of the cases. There is I mean, it's not like we're going to be dealing with a few hundred of these, but I would say there's probably 20, 30 different cases right now in the city that could use this, maybe a little less. It's hard to get an estimate on it.
And is that just from people subdividing lots and then selling them? Is that the correct understanding of how this happens? And I ask that to say, is there a way that we can prevent future improper lots?
Right. Yeah. What happens sometimes is, say you've got a piece of land. It's been in the family. One of the family, this is just a specific example, doesn't always happen like this. One of the family members passes away. You've got a number of children. That is just parceled off into chunks, into either different family members or combined family members. At that time, it's not subdivided to be developed. It's just split off. So it's divided evenly. And that's just.
But and is that done with property lines? Because I understand, like,
yeah.
if they were to do joint ownership, but they actually draw the lines.
Here, let's use an example.
Yes, please.
So
Yeah.
go to 2500 north and 1600 east.
Okay.
So this parcel right here, the Ricklinger parcel,
Mhm.
this entire parcel is all the way up to here. And the family, whoever, went in, oh, thank you. They went in, went to the county and created this parcel. But it's not a legal subdivision. So if they tried to sell this and I went and bought it, it meets the zoning. But the problem with it is it's not a legal subdivision. The
Right.
Subdivision's gonna require a cover, gutter, all the
Yeah.
way around into here. And so this becomes troubling. Now, this is all in the same family.
Yeah.
You know, but it becomes troubling with, say I bought this or whatever, somehow I owned it. It was a illegal parcel or whatever the terminology
Right.
is.
So you couldn't
It's
build on
troubling
it.
Because I can't just go put curb and gutter in here and call it that.
Mhm.
Right now, under the subdivision requirements, I would have to go in and create a subdivision for
Right.
curb and gutter all the way around here so that I could build it.
So I guess I'm wondering if at that point where they do subdivide their parcel, is there any sort of mechanism to say, hey, you can't redraw your property lines because you're then
Right.
anticipating it?
It doesn't go through us in any way.
Okay.
It goes
Just with the
straight to
county.
the
Just-
county.
Yep.
Yeah.
File it, okay.
And because there are legitimate reasons to do that. There are reasons people do that. It's tough to then try to crack down on
Sure.
the county and stop that from happening. So,
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure I have my head wrapped around it.
right.
Jeff, did I cut off one of your questions?
Oh, no.
Okay. Dwight?
I think Jeff outlined, and just to iterate one major item that we'll need to take care of, Jeff outlined it pretty well. So the one thing we do want to avoid is, again, a timeline helps with this, so it's not as quick and easy, but in the case of, and we're not picking on this property in
No,
any way.
it's just one I was
This
aware
could
of.
be
It's very
anywhere,
helpful.
right?
Yeah.
I
And I
just thought it
don't-
would be helpful to illustrate.
I don't actually know the history on this piece or what process they went. Some things were subdivided using the very minimal process originally introduced in the 70s. I don't know if that. what
Yeah, no
happened.
judgment zone.
No.
You got it.
But say you have one smaller parcel and one larger parcel. This process is followed. This lot is legitimized. Improvements are done in front of this piece. And we'll have to also say that this 2500 North, which it isn't as is, this is a very narrow road. It's not fully developed. It's got special circumstances. Say this is just a standard road here. A curb and gutter sidewalk goes in right in front of this home. Nothing goes in here. Those are improvements that potentially the city and the rest of the taxpayers would pay for later on. Whereas in our current code, if they had to put in all those improvements, those would be covered by the developer. So one thing we don't want to have happen is cause for lots to become legitimized and end up paying less in development costs. But in reality, it's not shrinking the price of the development costs, it's just making them pay a smaller piece of the puzzle. That said, Jeff also explained pretty well where if you just have one lot here and say this is owned by one person, two different people, making this one person pay for a large stretch is also not entirely fair. So there's a balance there, but it is a tricky one, which again is why I really want this to have increased scrutiny so that we can find the balance if we want it. This is not something required either. So we're not required to have this code in any way. It's just
Well,
may help.
right now, there isn't an option.
Correct. It just has to be
So,
subdivided. like you said.
if someone wanted to build on that little sliver there and they met the requirements of, it wasn't them or family or whatever.
Right.
That we're not holding that hostage.
Right.
Due to the fact that it's, we're calling it an illegal subdivision. So it does give a path forward to try and reconcile and make those work. But there is a balance to that it also can't be an unfair burden on the taxpayers that could potentially have to foot the bill. But what my curiosity is about this is, so what are we proposing? How do we fix that?
Yeah, so what would happen in that situation if this ordinance, if we pass it today as is?
So
What would
if we
that mean?
pass it today as is, the code as written requires the owner of an improper lot, innocent owner, to do the improvements in front of their parcel, except if it doesn't meet one of the other zoning codes. So if it doesn't meet access requirements per se for fire, so say you have a stretch in front of your parcel and say this road is one lane dirt road, which isn't actually that far from the truth.
Yeah,
Because it doesn't meet access, it doesn't have frontage, proper frontage along a road that's wide enough and improved, they would then have to improve down to there to make it meet access if they wanted to build. Now, say this road is all the way improved, it's just missing, say, your curb gutter, sidewalk, which is typical in a lot of places in the city. There's a road there, there's asphalt, just not a curb gutter sidewalk. They would be required to put the curb gutter sidewalk in front of their house, but wouldn't have to touch anything else. So
how do we define remuneratively? Like, I understand what that word means, but how do we define that if they're related, I guess, financially to the party that created the improper lot?
I had a really actually hard time dealing with this because it's easy enough to say you can't be familially related.
Sure.
But trying to express, and it's tough to enforce as well. It's trying to stop the case of two people that aren't related physically, but have a handshake agreement behind the scenes. Somebody comes in after this is split, buys it and says, oh, I didn't know. But in reality, they made a deal beforehand.
Right.
That's really hard to prove if it's done right. But in the case that we do know something or we become aware of that, I was hoping this would provide enough coverage. I do want Seth to take a look at that and see if maybe there's a better way to explain it.
Okay.
that's one of the things I hope he goes over with his fine tooth comb. If he says that that's enough, then great. The better way to do that, I think, is the year limit. That
Yeah.
kind of discourages that from happening.
Yeah, if you have to wait a decade, then you're forced to play that long game.
Yeah, it's pretty big
Okay.
thing to dissuade people.
I think that makes sense to me that you do long term, because I think that's where the loophole really is in if you can do it 1 year and then the next you say, oh shoot, I need to bring this into compliance for far less than I would have a year ago. I think that's what we're trying to avoid, really.
Yeah, I think the intent is good. It's just like you say, how do you craft this and make it seal all those up and be effective?
Right.
Agreed.
Okay, any other input on this? Yeah, Mr. Strebel, did you want to speak to this? Okay. Okay, then is that enough of input?
Yes,
From
and,
the
and
commission?
mostly I'm also looking just for because again, this is not something that's required.
Mhm.
Is it generally consensus that we should look into this and get this adopted?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Eric.
I was just gonna say, the only thing that makes me a little, just in terms of the timing, I would hope that we don't get something back, 2 days before from an attorney that says, yep, it's good, and go to a public hearing with that. I'd like enough time to at least look at it and
Okay.
say, make
Yeah.
sure that this makes sense to me.
And I mean, even if we had a meeting with a couple commissioners to really talk that out, I think that might be helpful. I don't know. I mean, I'm not asking for more meetings, but I think it's helpful if we can kind of parry back and forth with the attorney and say, have we thought about this? And
Okay. I will check with his schedule and when he thinks he can get through this.
okay,
And try to set a date as an incentive to get there.
okay,
Potentially by mid to late next week, I would guess. May
Okay,
give
great.
him enough time, but I'll have to check what his schedule is. He's been extremely busy
because
recently.
I think for me, that's got to be there. We have to have some level of expertise to tell us that we're not making a really foolish move. So
That makes
it's
sense.
really conditional upon Seth effectively signing off on this. So, okay. Well, with that, then, do we have any staff business or discussion?
No, just a heads up looking forward at the next planning commission and beyond. We do have 3 public hearings next week on ordinances that we've been discussing and kind of queuing up. The water meter size, this improper lot, and the steepness of roads to get those finalized. I'm also planning on bringing back the water conservation plan and ingress egress. So it's going to be an ordinance heavy meeting next week. Hopefully some of those will go fairly quick. They're pretty small changes though.
And public hearings or just discussion?
Those first 3 are public hearings. The other 2, the water conservation and ingress egress, I gathered from our last meeting that we wanted to get it tweaked a little bit so we're comfortable with it before a public hearing. So
Is that everyone's understanding on the ingress egress? I'm anxious to get that moving. I mean, I want to be respectful of any sort of concerns that the commission has, but I know at least I've attended that meeting with Seth about kind of solidifying that. So we've already gone past that legal review phase.
right. There is just on the specific language.
Okay.
It's the concept's easier to pin down in visuals and on a map looking at it than it is in language. I just want to make sure the language is there and going to achieve what we want. We could potentially in that meeting with Seth bring that language again and get more comfortable. As far as if we can't have a public hearing on it. I noticed the ones I anticipated us doing. So we're past the notice date at this point to be able
Okay.
to do it in 2 weeks. But we could notice it for the meeting in 4 weeks.
Okay.
I think we talked those 2 items mid to end next week if we get a meeting with Seth though.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, any commissioner business? Okay. All right, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
Dwight seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Clock.